Hey guys, my name is Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic, and it's great to be here. I have some good news for you. I'm in my 44th year of sobriety, and on the way up here, it's a 2-hour drive for me to get up. Well, an hour and a half. Get up here, and I went over the meeting in my mind coming up here, and I think the meeting that I have planned for you is unbelievable. It's the best meeting I've ever done in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was so inspired by it. It's incredible. I can't wait to. But unfortunately, I forgot the whole thing. Because I'm old. I'm 75. It's over for me. So I understand they're giving long odds in Vegas as to whether or not I'm actually going to mention the fourth step. The whole meeting's going to be on the fourth step. Well, who knows? We'll see. Maybe. Possibly. We'll see at the end. It's going to be on something. So I was at a meeting the other day. It was interesting. And I did a meeting the other day down here, like an in-person thing. There was a young lady there who came up to me, and she said, I got to tell you something. I'm totally, I got many years, 18 years, and I'm totally into AA. I am like into AA. I'm AA. And I just want you to know that I take notes. I'm down with everything you say. I agree with you. Which is always a good way to start with me, quite frankly, to be honest with you. And except for one thing. Except for one thing that you do, which really bothers me. And so I said, let me make sure I understand you. Because I'm slow. I said, you're totally into AA. As am I, well, sort of. Because I sort of left AA a while ago, but that's a long story. But I'm actually in it. I'm allowed to be here. I got my card, but AA did for me what AA should do for everybody, allow you to be able to leave AA. No, you don't understand that, but it'll bother you it'll bother you. It'll allow you to take a leap to a different level. Instead of leaving the coffin, you use it as a launching pad. And you won't be trapped in the bucket of crabs, but that's a whole long story. Maybe you'll get some of that. So I said, let me get this straight. I said, you're down with everything I say, but you're 100% AA. The traditions, all that stuff. So you're down with that spiritual axiom, right? That's axiomatic in AA. Whenever you're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with you. He says, yeah. So you agree with everything I say, except there's one thing I say that bothers you. I said, well, here's the good news. You only have one thing you have to work on. And if you can get past that one thing, you may find yourself in a different situation, different level, different deal. So I know I say some things that sort of disturb people. It's good to be disturbed. You need to be. I have a knife at home. One of my favorite. I have a couple of favorite knives. It's just great. It's a great knife. But every once in a while it gets dull, so I have a knife sharpener. And what I do is I take the knife sharpener up and and it's got like 3 sides, like the coarse side and the medium coarse and the fine side, and I grind it and I do the thing, and it creates a friction and just peels it down and everything like that, and then it cuts like anything, you know what I mean? It's great, but it's got to be sharpened every once in a while. That's the deal. It's got to be sharpened. There's this great quote in Psalms. I have a shirt that actually says it. As iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. As iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. As you know, at 10 years sobriety, I was directed to get involved in Bible study. And the big book was written by Bill Wilson after reading and studying the Bible with Bob Smith. It's all in there. And the big book took me to a certain place. The Bible was written by hundreds of men over a period of thousands of years and survived like 7,000 or 8,000 years about searching for God and who God is. So at one point in time in my life, when I was trying to figure out who God was and what was going on and get to a next level, a guy suggested, he said, you're reading Bill Wilson's book, where they said the books they found absolutely essential, the founders were 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and the book of James. You're reading a book that's based upon biblical doctrine, which was developed over a period of thousands and thousands of years by hundreds and hundreds of men, and to survive that long. He says, you're reading this book by Bill Wilson. He says, why don't you read the books that they were reading? That is about thousands of men searching for God and who he is and what he is over thousands of years. And I didn't want to do it. I did not want to do it. Because when you get to a point where you're, one of the consequences, it says, unless and until an alcoholic accepts his alcoholism and its consequences, one of the consequences of being an alcoholic is we're not disciplined. I say that because not only that I know it now, looking back, I know a lot of things about myself I would not have believed before. I mean, I went through law school, got Departmental Honors in Mathematics, was going PhD in algebraic topology, got a law degree, became a division chief. The last thing you would be able to sell me on is that I'm not disciplined. But the truth is, I'm sort of like lazy. And once I get to a point where I'm comfortable, even if I'm uncomfortable, but I'm comfortably uncomfortable. I mean, to a great extent, one of the great things that alcoholics, whether it's good or bad, is as crazy as we are and as sensitive we are and upsettable as we are, we somehow manage to be able to live a crappy life and be satisfied with it. I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, if anybody could live, I know we're whiners and criers and thumb-sucking crybabies, but if you've ever run across a great group of people that could live shitty lives and somehow be able to tell themselves, I'm doing okay. You know what I mean? That's got to be alcoholics. Yeah, I'm living here on the streets. I'm in a refrigerator box for my bed, but you know, it ain't that bad, you know? I mean, we can tell ourselves anything and put up with anything. And that is what leads to what we talk about resting on your laurels. Because there's a Newtonian, in Newtonian physics, one of the first laws of Newtonian physics is a body will stay at rest. A body at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. And it's a spiritual law. An alcoholic will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. That's why we have repeated humiliations, final crushing of our self-sufficiency, hitting bottom. So if the booze gets real bad, and think about it, think about how much crap you went through in your life. How many times people said you got to stop drinking? How many times you said to yourself you got to stop drinking? I mean, it's not like you had a bad batch of ice on a Saturday night and say, I got to go to AA. And we're talking about usually decades or years of screwing up and doing all sorts of things until you finally, things get so bad, you finally go to AA and you give up the ghost and you do a few rules and you hang around and you stop drinking. You know, only after you really hit bottom and, you know, most people, and then what happens? Then you get comfortable for a year or 2 or 3 or 4. And you start saying things, well, you know, I like that guy Russell, except for that one thing. You know, you start picking, well, I like that guy, but he doesn't talk. I like that, but I don't like the God thing, but I don't like the this and everything like that. And you start getting really discriminating, using your mind. Well, that's another thing I want to touch upon, that we're delusional. I think in order to understand the 4th step, you got to understand the nature of delusion. You know, the delusion, in big book terms, it means you can't separate the true from the false. Your alcoholic life seems the only normal one. In other words, you feel that your thinking is normal. Your best thinking on your best day got you into this deal. That's why they say the grouch and the brainstorm is not for us. We're insane, but we may be insane, but we're comfortably insane. And we hang out with people who talk like we do, that are as sane as we do. people that are what we think insane are like church people that live, regular lives and go to church and they follow certain rules and they're not perfect, but when they're disciplined, they don't get arrested, they raise kids. They're fucking insane. You know what I mean? They make us uncomfortable. We like hanging around like fuck-ups, like us. Because we think, now these are really good people, and they're good people because we're all good people, what I mean? But it's amazing how I think the first 10, 20, 30, 40 years in AA is about learning how insane you are. Because we usually think we're insane because of the drinking, but the drinking's really a symptom. The real disease centers in our mind, not our body. And so that's the whole point of finding a power by which we could live. And that's what the God thing is all about. And somehow this has something to do with the fourth step. And somehow the fourth step, doing this little exercise, which is extremely important, but really not important. It was extremely important for me to learn how to, in my sleep, like if you're in the military or something, you got to learn how to put together an M1 or an M30, you got to be able to, in the dark or something. If you're in AA and you're going to last any amount of time, you got to learn how to do a fourth step. It's a tool where it'll show a blind person how to see. Amazing Grace, I was blind, but now I'm seeing. The fourth step is a tool by which you can glean how fucked up you are. You understand? That's what it's for. You do the fourth step, it's like radar, it's like a spiritual MRI. You look at it and you say, man, I really am screwed up. So it's important to understand that. But what the problem is it'll reveal glaring defects, but as time goes on, you can be very, very comfortable and very, very defective, and yet not drink and pick up medallions and think that you're doing okay. And, because you're not being arrested and you're going to AA and you're sponsoring some people, not understanding how deep and defective you really are. But the good news is alcoholism is cunning, powerful disease, and eventually, if you don't get off your ass and you rest on your laurels, you're heading for trouble if you do, because it's a subtle foe. It's very subtle. And it may take 10 or 20 or 30 years. There are people that drink after 20. There are people that drink after 5 years, after 10 years, after 20, after 30 years. There are people that don't drink after 20 years going to meetings, and they're miserable, but they don't know they're miserable. And you might not know they're miserable because they don't talk about it, because they don't even realize how miserable they are until something really horrible happens. They may die in their lives of quiet desperation. And so one of the things that has to become apparent to me, which sometimes, quite frankly, takes years, is how screwed up I actually am. Because only by understanding how screwed up I am, and knowing how horrible this disease is, do you get the understanding of what it will give you in the fourth step, and maybe even help you understand how screwed up you are, even if you don't physically write it down. But you just got to know, in order to know the good news, you got to know the bad news. So let me give you an example, because I always think stories are important, not just preaching or something like that or talking about stuff, but I'll give you an example. Now, I have proof that I'm brilliant, okay? And humble. No, I do. I made straight A's in school. I took all the courses for departmental honors in mathematics for my PhD. I ended up being a lawyer. I got all the diplomas. You guys all know the story. I won't go through the whole thing again, but my first sponsor, when he came to see me, I pointed at my wall and had all these diplomas and degrees on them and said, because I was supposed to be sponsored by Albert Einstein or Jesus, but they weren't available, so they gave me a used car salesman that didn't even graduate the 6th grade. And I said to him, I said, Bob, these are all my degrees. And he looked at me, he says, well, Russ, rectal thermometers have degrees, and you know what they do with those. So that's like you get a little laugh, but really he didn't think much of it, because they used to always say to me, your best thinking got you in here. See, I knew everything, but that's all I knew. I didn't know how to hurt people, how not to hurt people. I didn't know how to keep a marriage together. I didn't know how not to worry. You know, it's a funny thing about an alcoholic brain, and I say this looking backwards for 44 years. You understand what I'm saying? It's not like I couldn't give this talk at 3 months. I couldn't give it at 3 years. I couldn't give this talk at 20 years. Okay, but looking back, you know, I can tell you that it is entirely possible for an alcoholic to absolutely know he is the smartest son of a bitch in the room, and that he knows everything, and nobody can tell him anything, and that he's doing great, and he can figure it all out, and he can get by using his own wits, and at the same time be concerned that they're all going to find out he's a phony and he doesn't know shit. It sets up some sort of friction. I don't know what it is, you know? A scotch will solve that problem, you know what I mean? Where one part of you thinks you're great, and nobody can tell you anything, and you ain't listening to anybody, and it's all bullshit, because people bother you, and you think you're great, and you can do the whole thing yourself, and the other part of you is you're scared shitless all the time. That you're going to be found out, or you're going to fail, or something's going to happen. I mean, if you're an alcoholic, the mind of an alcoholic is like a real mixed bag. You know what I mean? Highs and lows and ups and downs and all over the place. You know, and because of this, no matter how great an IQ we have, no matter how smart we are, it somehow gets mixed up with emotions and feelings and instincts, and we do stupid shit. So I'll give you an example. Let me give you 3 or 4 examples of actual examples of alcoholic thinking, which is why they say the grouch and the brainstorm is for us. You know, why we have a real problem, no matter how smart you think you are. You know, so my sponsor said, when I asked him to be my sponsor, he said, I want you to do 2 things. He says, I want you to, you know, he says, I want you to get on your knees every day and ask God's help to stay sober and read the 24-hour book every day. I said, okay, and I did that. He didn't ask me whether I believed in God, I just did that. And he said, call me before you take a drink. Don't call me after you take a drink. He was good. He says, call me before you take the drink. And I did that. I actually didn't do that. I tried to call him before I took a drink. He didn't answer the phone. I kept on trying to call him, and, you know, because I was going to drink at my wife. I was going to teach her a lesson because she had hurt my feelings, so I was going to drink at her. And so that's how I was going to hurt her. That's how I was going to get back at her, by drinking. And so I remember when I called my sponsor 3 or 4 times. He didn't answer. Then it was a busy signal. Then he didn't answer. So the next day I said, you know, you told me to call you if I was going to drink, and I was going to drink, and I called you, and, you know, you didn't answer, and then it was busy, and then you didn't answer. He says, well, did you drink? I said, no, I didn't drink. He said, see, it works, so, you know. So apparently it did. I didn't. But the third thing he asked me to do is join a home group. So I went to the South Dixie group. Now, I'm 3 months sober. I'm as sober physically as I am right now, physically sober, away from booze. And I have a mission to go to the South Day group to join the group, because he said I have to find a home group. Or see, you know, I was auditioning groups. So I went into the South Dixie group, and I'm in the South Day room, and you know, it's like this. There's about, well, there's like about 40 people or something, smaller than this, about half this side. And I sit where new people sit, all the way in the back of the room, like I'm blending into the wall. You understand what I'm saying? But I'm in the back of the room, and I realize immediately that I'm just waiting for them to call on me and recognize me as the emperor of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because of my brilliance, of course, you know? And there's a guy chairing the meeting, and I don't know anybody, and they're all sitting in little tables, you know, and talk to each other, these little cliques, you know, these little tables, you know. And I'm in the back of the room, and I'm new, I'm brand new. And I'm a brand new guy, and, you know, I've been told that the newcomer is the most important person in the room, which is great if you're somebody like me, because I always think I'm the most important person in the room. And so, I mean, I know they're going to call me because I'm most important, love and tolerance, I call them the new. And so it goes around, and the way they were doing it is the speaker, you don't raise your hand, the speaker would call on people. So he would do his little rap, and then he'd say, Joe, what do you have to say about that? And Joe would say something. And Pete, what do you have to say about that? And Pete would say something. He says, Josh, what do you have to, Mary, what do you have to say about that? And I'm waiting for them to call me because I'm like the newest guy there. I'm obvious, I must stick out like a sore thumb. I'm brand new. They don't know me. I'm the most important guy in the room. I'm brand new. And they keep on calling people. And every time they call somebody other than me, I'm saying, in my mind, this is the way I'm talking to myself, this group is totally fucked up. I'm a new person. I'm the most important person in the room. They must know I'm in the room. They're calling on all their friends, all their buddies. They're not calling on B's. These guys are total assholes. These are not real AA people. They're supposed to love me. They're supposed to pick on me. They're supposed to treat me special. And I am just convinced that these are the worst group in the world. And they close the meeting. They never call on me, ever. So I leave the meeting. So I meet my sponsor the next day, and he says, so how was that South Dayton? This is 3 months sober. And he says, how was that? He says, that's the worst group in the world. And I tell him everything that happened. I tell him everything I just told you. They didn't call me a bunch of clicks. They don't give a crap about the newcomer or anything like that. And my sponsor, who had 15 years at the time, says this. Yeah, I can't compete with that. So if you want to listen...
Something about a gunshot.
Gunshot wound. That's okay, that happens to me too. It's very embarrassing. I'm not saying it's your fault. It's fucking AA. It takes over the world, you know. You're just minding your own business and all of a sudden it just goes off or something. So he says, so what about that? And so I tell him everything I just told you, my sponsor, who's, not as smart as I am. You understand? He's not smart like me. He doesn't have any degrees. He didn't even graduate the 6th grade. And I tell them everything I just told you. And let me tell you something, I'm right. I'm like Alki right. If you don't understand what I'm saying, you're stupid. These people are selfish bastards. They didn't call me. Nobody came up to me or anything like that. It's totally un-AA. And so my sponsor looks at me and here's the whole story. This is what he says to me. He says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go back to that group and I want you to join one of the cliques. And I say, excuse me? He says, I want you to go back to the group and I want you to join. Now I can promise you this. When I was telling them all that and I wanted them to hop on the bandwagon, yeah, they're assholes, that's a terrible group. The last thing I ever expected for him to say was that thing. The last thing I would have ever thought of is I'll try that group again. Because I'm an alcoholic. I just cross that group off my list, hate them, and I gossip about them to everybody, And I can't even tell you today, sitting here, why I didn't fire him, get another sponsor, or why I even went back to the group. I really can't, except they caught me at 3 months. I guess I was still in a position where I actually, what did Clarence used to say? He was sponsored by Dr. Bob. He used to say, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. I was in that mode where I did what people told me to do. I know we're undisciplined, but there are times in an alcoholic's life where if you tell them to do something, they'll actually do it. So I did it. So I went back to the group. I walked in. There were a bunch of guys at the table. And I walked in, same group. I walked in. I went up to the table and I said, hi, my name's Russell. I'm brand new. I got 3 months. And they shook my hand and said, hey, let me get you a cup of coffee. So one guy got me a cup of coffee. He says, you got 3 months? I said, yeah. He says, why don't you chair the meeting? I said, really? He says, yeah, why don't you chair the meeting? So I chaired the meeting. I did probably the worst meeting in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. And after the meeting, they came up to me and said, hey, thanks a lot. That was great. We really enjoyed it. Thanks. God bless you. Everything like that. I left. And so my sponsor sees me that day and he says, so how was that group? I said, that is the best fucking group in the universe. You understand what I'm saying? In the universe. That is an incredible group. So I go back to that group about a month later. My sponsor says, there's a guy speaking, and he's an incredible speaker. You got to listen to this guy. So I went to the South Dixie room. Sober as I am right now, physically. And I sit down, and the guy says, my name is Joe, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. And I knew that he was totally full of shit. Because I'm smart, because I know we are not cured. I know that we are recovering alcoholics, that nobody's recovered. It's almost like the guy is saying, and I wasn't lost in the fact that he's like saying, I'm better than you. You know what I mean? Because I guess he's cured and I'm not. And then I start thinking about all the people that he's hurting at that meeting. Because being brilliant, I know that I am picking up on the fact that he's full of shit. But nobody else, none of the 100 people in that group were listening. They don't realize the poison he's dishing out. And for the next 20 minutes, I'm debating with myself whether I should stand up, this compulsion to stand up and say, this guy's full of shit, he's killing you, he doesn't know what he's talking about, we are not recovering, everything like that. And I'm debating, and the meeting ends, and I walk out, and my sponsor says, so how'd you like it? I said, he's full of shit. I said, what do you mean? He said he was recovered. And we're not recovered, we're not cured. He says, well, you are recovered. Haven't you ever read the book? He said, sure I have. And he opens up the book, he says, we have Alcoholics Anonymous, over 100 men and women who have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. I said, oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I didn't see that. And he said, well, what else did he say? I said, gee, I don't know, because I stopped listening to him after the recovered shit. So now I'm 8 years sober. This is an alcoholic brain working on perceiving things and making judgments without alcohol, but still delusional, still sick. My sponsor used to say, why do you do the things you do? Why do you say the stuff you say? And I used to say, well, that's just my personality. He said, your personality is killing you. So now I'm 8 years sober, I'm sponsoring people, I'm talking all over town, I'm giving step series and shit like that. I think I might have started speaking at convention stuff, I'm not even sure. I have a friend who's got 11 years, his name's John. And he says, some of you have heard this story, but I'll say it. He says, Russ, why don't we meet at, the American Diner at 5:30, have dinner, and then we'll go to the 8:30 or whatever it is meeting. I said, sure. So I go over to the diner, 5:30, he never shows up. I don't know if you've ever been disappointed by somebody in AA, but he was in AA, he's got 3 or 4 more years than me, and he didn't show up. So I saw him at the meeting. I said, I went over to the diner and you didn't show up. He said, oh yeah, something came up. That's it, not I'm sorry, or just something came up. He says, I'll meet you there tomorrow night. And so I went over there the next night at 5:30 and he doesn't show up. So I meet him at the room. And I said, John, I went over there again. Remember we were supposed to meet, you didn't show up. He says, yeah, I had something else I had to do. That's what he says. So now I'm getting, really sort of pissed. I said, he says, look, listen, I'll meet you tomorrow night at some sort of place, whatever it is, and we'll then go to a meeting. I said, so I show up the next time and he doesn't show up. And now I'm freaking out. I'm going nuts. And I'm 8 years sober. I'm not 3 months sober. I'm not 4 months sober. I'm 8 years sober. He's 11 years sober. And I am frosted. And there is no doubt in my mind, as there should be no doubt in your mind, that he's one sick son of a bitch. And there's nothing wrong with me. And I went over to Dan Carell, who had 40 years, to tell on him. Because it was bothering me. It was because it was bothering me. It was something he was doing that was bothering me, And I told Dan Carell the whole story that I just told you. And then he spent 15 minutes beating the living shit out of me. And the only thing he wanted to know is why I showed up the second time. He didn't want to know about the third time, but he just wanted to know why I showed up the second time. And for at least 10 minutes of that conversation, I didn't even know what the fuck he was talking about. Because I didn't even understand why that was even an issue. I didn't even understand why that was an issue. And then when I finally sort of understood, he just wanted to know why I showed up the second time, I was screwed because I didn't know the answer. I didn't know the answer as to why I put myself in a position to show up the second time for a person who was either not sober or not honest or not emotionally available. I didn't know the answer to a question and a problem that had been plaguing me my entire life, which he thought was the only important thing. And then finally he said at the very end, he said, well, what's wrong with John? He said, he said, he's not sober. He said, what do you mean he's not sober? He's got 11 years. He says, listen, people who do that are not sober. Sober people show up, or they apologize, or they call up. He's not sober. And I learned later on that he had been popping Xanax, that he wasn't sober. And I've got examples like that. I can give you my entire life for the next 10, 15 years, 20 years, where I made judgments sober, while sponsoring people and doing all the steps in AA and the 4th and the 10th and whatever you want to do in AA, where my brain, using my brain on my life, came up with the wrong answer. The wrong question, the wrong answer, the wrong decision, the wrong people, the wrong everything. What does John Wayne say? Life is tough, and when you're stupid, it's even tougher. And I couldn't even see it. I couldn't even see it. And here's the real crazy stuff. Now I'm not blind anymore. It's like amazing. I'm blind, but now I see. Now I see the dis-ease. I see the dis-ease. If you came up to me and you started telling me about a problem you were having, I would probably talk to you the way Dane Carell talked to me, and I'd say, you'd want to know, well, why do you do this and why do you do that? And I said, well, why does it bother you? I would ask you a question where you'd say, what does that have to do with it? You know what I mean? Because you're stuck in the disease and you don't even know you're stuck in the disease. You don't even understand it because it's so subtle. This disease is so subtle. Now, here's the crazy part. That thinking that I exhibited at 3 months, the worst group in the world, terrible people, they're horrible people, all of a sudden they're the best group in the world. He's such an asshole. Why did this guy do it? He's sober. I can't believe he did that. He's not sober. And why would you put yourself in that position with somebody who would already hurt you? Why do you hang around with toxic people? Why are you so dependent? Why do you need people? Why do you so much need people to love you and accept you that you'll chase people and put yourself in a position to get involved in people that are only going to hurt you and screw you up? Why do you always choose the people that are playing hard to get and are hurting you and walk away from the people that are lifting you up? Why are you doing that? That's at 8 years. And I can think of 5 or 6 more, believe me, that just off the top of my head of things that I did at 15 years, 20 years, whatever it is. And here's the crazy part. That thinking that I just told you about, which is sick alcoholic thinking that I didn't even know I had. As a matter of fact, when I was asked the question, I didn't even understand the question. That's how delusional I was. I didn't even understand the question. That's like when I told you that story. I think I told this group the story where some guy bounced the check on me. I went all over the place talking about how he bounced the check on me. And my sponsor said, why does that? How would you feel if it didn't bother you? And I said, I don't understand the question. What's the question? How would it feel? I said, I don't understand. He says, this is very simple. How would it feel if it didn't bother you? I said, I swear to God, Bob, I don't understand the question. He bounced up. And I said, finally, what do you mean? You mean, how would I feel if it didn't bother me that he bounced a $500 check? He says, yes. How would you feel if it didn't bother you that he bounced a $500 check on you? I said, well, if it didn't bother me, I'd feel fine. He said, there you go, and he walked away. And so I'm not even sure I understood that right when he said that. I probably didn't understand. Something that he pointed out to me about myself. I know I didn't understand it because 10 years later, I was telling her I was going to divorce my wife because of something she did that bothered me. And my next sponsor said, why are you upset? And I said, what do you mean why I'm upset? She did this, she did that, she did this. Why? They always ask questions that are designed to show you how delusional and sick you are, because I was blaming my wife for being a woman, for being a wife, for doing what wives do. You know what I mean? Cross-examining you about stuff that they shouldn't cross-examine you about, and repeating themselves, and stop it already. I agree. Yeah, and another thing, I said I agree. What more do you want? And And he said, and so he finally says, he says, you're upset because you're upsettable. And so what, after 15, 20 years, I finally all of a sudden embraced the spiritual axiom: whenever I'm disturbed, no matter what the cause is, something wrong with me. And so as soon as I get upset, 99% of the time, as soon as I get upset, I realize that there's something wrong with me, and I stop getting mad at my wife and say, what's going on with me? And after about 20 years, I stopped getting upset. Not altogether, 100 million %, but pretty much I live pretty much unupsettable life even as things are going on. Because I realize that, because I've changed, because God's ability to transform you, if you know who he is and you worship him and things like that. And it also coincided a lot with Bible study. So now here's the really crazy part. That thinking that I just described to you, that delusional, crazy thinking where you're crazy and you're making crazy decisions and crazy feelings that are hurting you, and you're feeling bad about people, that was going on from 3 months sober to 30 years sober. I didn't just get that or catch that after I joined Alcoholics Anonymous. In other words, I came to AA when I was 31 years old. Okay? Between the years 31 years old and like 20 or 30 years after that, that's the kind of thinking I had, sober, working the steps, sponsoring people, picking up medallions. That didn't start when I joined Alcoholics Anonymous. That crazy thinking was going on in spades from year 2 to 31. That sort of thinking was why I got married to who I got married to, why I got divorced, why I hurt my wife, why I left my wife and kids, why I chose my job, why I did. Every decision I made, as I was obviously smarter than anybody in the room, was based upon that type of thinking. Can you imagine that? The craziest frickin' thinking that you think and you do and you feel sober, that you might recognize because you don't want to drink and you go up to a sponsor and like, you might ultimately recognize was going on before you got sober, but you didn't even think there was a problem because you didn't see the question, and there was nobody there to talk to you like Bob talked to me or Joe talked to me. There was nobody there. There was no Dane Carell to say, why'd you go back the second time? And even if there was a guy by accident that you ran into who was sane, because the only guys I spoke to were guys like me in the bar who thought like me, who would say, yeah, that gal's a bitch, or that guy's this, or who would basically agree with me. And if I ever ran into somebody who would talk to me like sane alcoholics, like old timers talk to me, I would think they were crazy. And I wouldn't even listen to them. Yeah, I wouldn't even listen to them. That's how sick this disease, that's how long it takes to even see the craziness of this disease. As iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. So what happens? What happens? There's this line out of the Bible where Jesus, the rich young kid, goes to Jesus after he does a step meeting and says, because that's what he was doing. He's doing step meetings around town. And he says, I want to be just like you. And Jesus says, well, just do the steps. That's what he says, just do the 10 Commandments. And the kid says, well, I've been doing the 10 Commandments. I've done all the steps. I've done them all the time. I'm perfect at the steps. Jesus looks at him. He was a lot nicer than me, and he didn't use the F word. He says basically what I would have said to him. I said, well, that's simple. You only have one problem. Just one problem. This is what's that? He says, sell everything you have, give it to the poor, pick up a cross and follow me into a life of suffering for other people and helping other people. And the kid turned away. What the Bible says, this is the wisdom of the Bible. This is where I started seeing things differently. The kid turned away and he was very sad. He was depressed because he couldn't do it. He couldn't follow directions. He couldn't go back to the meeting and say, can I join the clique? You know what I mean? He couldn't look at what's really wrong with him. You know what I mean? He was self-right. He couldn't do it. He couldn't deal with the upset. He couldn't deal with that deal. So what happened is he couldn't do what he was ordered to do. And what happens, but the great thing is what Jesus said, just follow me. And what happened with me, and I don't know why, and I don't even take credit for it, because I take no credit for this stuff. I can't take credit for this stuff, because with my mind, is I just followed certain people. I don't know why I followed Bob Sullivan, who said, well, rectal thermometers have degrees, you know what they do with those. I was proud of my degrees. I thought I don't know why I continue to follow a guy who didn't even graduate the 6th grade, instead of look somebody smarter, who like made me feel stupid for talking about my degrees and said, you don't know, basically saying you don't know shit. I don't know why I followed him. I don't know why I followed Joe Snyder when he said to me, you know, that's not why you're upset, and sort of tried to tell me that I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't know why I followed guys like Dane Carell, who when I pointed out how this guy had hurt me and how wrong he was, and he was clearly wrong, I don't know why I followed a guy who all he wanted to talk about is why the hell did I go back the second time to try to, I don't know why would I follow people like that? Why would I follow people that not only disagreed with me, really basically sort of like humiliated me through sarcasm and skepticism, somehow hold a mirror up to my face to show me what an idiot I was? Why would I follow somebody like that? I was the division chief in the state's attorney's office. I was a major crimes prosecutor. I was smart. You know, why would I follow somebody that's like, by the time I was done with it, I felt like an idiot. You know, I mean, why would I follow somebody like that? All I know is because somehow, some way, I wanted what they had. I was willing to go to any length to get it, and I knew they had something that I didn't have. And so I was willing to do that and follow those guys and do what they said. When John Glenn was my sponsor, godly man, for 15, 20 years was my sponsor, and we'd go out to dinner. I'd start eating, he'd say, what are you doing? In a restaurant. I'd say, well, I'm eating. He says, you can't eat. We have to give thanks to the Lord. You know, this isn't like AA, you hold hands at the end of the meeting, you know, and all say the Lord's Prayer together, and nobody here is watching you except people in the room, and, you know, and this is like at a restaurant where there's tons of people. It's like a Denny's. He says, we got to thank the Lord. He'd bow his head, and I'd bow my head, and he'd say some long prayer. Well, it probably was only 30 seconds, but it seemed like 2 hours. You know what I mean? And he's saying a prayer to God because he believes in God, and I say to people I believe in God, and you know, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I'm starting to. I'm not sure who he is, and he's thanking Jesus and everything like that because he was a serious believer. And I'm looking around as he's talking. I'm looking around to see if there's anybody looking at us. Because like in AA, I'm worried about what other people are thinking about me and whether they're laughing about me and everything like that. And it didn't feel good in a weird way. And then we're done, and he said to me, now, Russell, the food will taste better because it's got that special ingredient. Why would I follow? You know, I was a math and physics and chemistry major. I was going for a PhD in algebraic topology. It was all about being smart and mathematics and science and law. Why would I follow a guy who's so stupid that he gives his life to Jesus? And he says stupid things like that because it was something John had that I never had. He had been rocking in the fourth dimension of existence. He had experienced much of heaven, and he knew peace. And I was surrounded by 1,000 smart men and women who were drunken idiots and fools. And there was one guy out of 1,000 named John Glenn, who everybody wanted to be around. They just wanted to sit next to him. Wherever I went, they said, is John with you? Because he had something none of those smart people had. That's what, he had something none of them had, and I wanted what he had. So I hung out with him. As iron sharpens iron, man sharpens man. So who's your iron? Who's your knife sharpener? Because the person you'll be in the next 5 years will depend upon the people you hang out with and the books you read. So in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to cover the 4-step with you. I'm going to cover it in 30 seconds. You open up the book. This is how I did it. And there's a chart. Now it's going to take, like it took me, I took a guy to say, the way I did it, because I couldn't do it and I didn't understand, he said, listen, stupid, open up the book, there's a chart, there's 4 lists. There's a list of resentments, there's a list of faults, there's a list of fears, there's a list of stuff having to do with the sex, and everything like that. And you look at the chart and you make the chart. My cousin Valerie, she's a rich bitch, she doesn't know what it's like not to have any money, you know what I mean? And she thinks she's better than everybody else, affects my self-esteem. It gives you a list of things you can check on what it affects. It says you look back over the list, and you see a list, well, forgetting about what she did, where were you at fault? You're always thinking bad thoughts about her. You're always gossiping about her. You think badly of her all the time. Then you list your list of, that's your list of faults. Where you're wrong. Then you write down. Very simple. And you read what they say after each one. Then what do? You write down your list of fears. Fear of what people finding out I'm a phony. Fear of people not liking me, fear of being humiliated, whatever the fears are, feel of being broke, feel of being, whatever the fears are, you write them down. Then it says in sexual decision, where have you put somebody in a situation where you made them feel guilty or you hurt them, having done romance or fear, you write that stuff down. And you learn how to do it, you become proficient in that. And you do it, you just do it, and then after you do it a bunch of times, especially when you're not feeling good, you can't get something off your mind, you put the guy's name down on the list. Russell, I can't stand him, he's always talking about Jesus, it's a violation of the traditions, it affects my self-esteem, my personal, whatever the fuck that is, where am I wrong? I said, well, really, I can't look past the person and his personalities into the principle and see what the principal is trying to say, I gossip about him all, whatever the hell it is, and then you probably owe me an amends somewhere down the road or something like that. It doesn't, and then you do it enough over and over again. You do it enough over and over again that you can do it quickly, you can do it in your mind. You learn how to sort of think fourth step. You think away, you think this thing, you can do it like on the fly. And then if you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, you may not even do it so much anymore because you may just be living it. You may live a life where you don't gossip about people behind their back. You may live a life where you're not bitter to people. You may live a life where you don't hurt people or judge people. You may not have to make a lot of amends to anybody because you don't do stupid things, you don't hurt people. And you practice something at the end of the 10th step that says when you do it over and over again, you learn something called restraint of tongue and pen. And so what happens is you don't find yourself constantly thinking about what people thinking about you, and you start feeling guilty about stuff because you're not doing stuff to feel guilty about. You're not hurting people because all of a sudden you're living a John Glenn life. You're living a Joe Snyder life. You're living an old-timer life. You're living the life of those people that you wanted what they had because you hung around them long enough. You hang around the right people long enough so that you become them. You with me? So, the 4th step is just a tool, And then what you ultimately learn, which is way down the road, and we'll talk about this later on, we don't have time to talk about this, that the real key is knowing who God is, coming to know who God is, so you grow in his image and likeness so that he can transform you. And you don't conform yourself to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't conform yourself to this fellowship. I can guarantee you, Alcoholics Anonymous and the fellowship of the Alcoholics Anonymous was not the God of Bob Smith's understanding. And for a little while it was the God of Bill Wilson's understanding until he started sucking on the LSD, and he wrote that last essay he wrote called Emotional Sobriety. He said, I got it all wrong. I was dependent too much on AA as being my God and being the central fact of my life. But the truth is, the great fact is, God's got to be the central fact in your life. You must be convinced that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is miraculous. And you must be, as it says in the 6th step, to be separated out, be trying to grow in the image and likeness of your Creator. And the whole key is, the closer you get to your Creator and knowing who he is and what he looks like, and being assured that you know him, not only believe in him, but you know who he is, the better shot you have of like growing into his image.
Amen.
And you become transformed, because you're hanging around with you want to hang around with a real knife sharpener. So you be a sharp knife. You with me? So I don't know, was that the fourth step? Or
Absolutely.
what? I don't know, was that the fourth step?